Hello and welcome to another BlenderWiz video tutorial. In this tutorial, we are going to create blueprints using the new Freestyle system. We will begin with an overview of what different parts are capable of and how to get a cartoon look. Then, we'll move on to creating blueprints for a gear using the Freestyle system. The new Freestyle system is very good at giving us a cartoony feel to an image. Basically, it generates lines along the edges of a mesh. Let's begin with this simple cube. If we render it right now using the Blender render engine, it will give us a very basic cube. So let's make this cube look like it is part of a cartoon. We will want to get rid of this really dark part without creating a super advanced lighting setup. So let's hop over to the world settings, enable the environmental lighting and indirect lighting. If we give this a quick render now, it will look much better. Finally, let's brighten up the horizon a little bit. So I'm just going to set mine to white. If you want, you can give it a paper texture and make it look like this cartoon is drawn out on paper. And so let's start setting up a material now for this cube. So hop over to the Materials tab. Change the diffuse shading to Toon, and let's turn the specular intensity all the way down. If you want, you can change the shading to Toon as well. However, since the intensity is at 0, it doesn't really matter. We won't see it anyway. Now, playing with the size of the Toon shader, we can adjust how much reflection or how much Toon shading there is. So I'm just going to turn this up to 0.8. And this will just make the entire top part white. Or not white for the entire thing, but it'll just make it look a little bit more toony. We can leave the smoothness at the default 0.1, and we still see a rather boring cube. Better than it was originally, but it's still not quite right. Before we move into Freestyle, let's go ahead and add a plane below the cube so we can get a nice shadow here. So let's move up the cube by one unit. So hit G, Z, and then 1. And now let's just bring in a plane. Scale this up. Right about there should be good. If we were to render this now, we have this plane right here and nice shadow, but really not the best. So let's go ahead and give this plane a new material and just come under Shadow and do shadows only, and that will pretty much make it disappear except for the shadow. We are now ready to get into Freestyle. So head over to the render settings and enable Freestyle. This alone won't give us any results. We need to go over to the render layers and give Freestyle a render layer to render the lines to. If we do that, we can see that we now have a black edge on our plane and a black edge surrounding our cube. So there are now a handful of tools below our line set that we can now use. Let's go ahead and disable all of them. If we hit F12 now, we really won't notice a change, but let's move the plane over so that this edge here intersects the mesh. Now you can see that we have a line that passes right through the mesh. So let's turn visibility back on and just leaving it at the default visible. We can see that now it only draws the edge on visible mesh pieces. If we switch the visibility to hidden, the line will only be drawn on the hidden section, or parts that are not visible. Then QI range has something to do with how invisible the edge is. I haven't really figured out how to use this one, so play around with it and let me know how it goes. My guess is it has something to do with the transparency, or it might be good for glass. I'm not entirely sure, so let me know how that goes. The option we want to use is visible. Now, if we enable edge types, we'll have more control over what edges are drawn. Just enabling silhouette here, it will draw a silhouette of our cube object. Border will draw a border on our plane object. Contour will draw on pretty much any edge except the ones that are inside of a polygon. Crease will draw on any edge that meets the crease requirements. Above, under the edge detection options, there is a slider for the crease. Right now it is set to 0 by default, and so basically it will draw on any edge with it 0 degrees. So it really doesn't draw on anything. Now if we go ahead and change this to 90 degrees and render it again, every edge that is 90 degrees will be drawn. There are other options in this panel, but you can experiment with them and see what each one does. Now, edge marks here is a fairly interesting one. Let's go ahead and render this. What it does is it will render on any edge that we have assigned to the Freestyle edge marked groups. So let's tab into edit mode with our cube selected and select some edges here. If we hit Control E, mark Freestyle edges, it will assign these edges to a special group that Freestyle will then render. This is useful in the case where we have an edge that won't quite show up in the other Freestyle settings, and we can just select it and have it render it. On the simple cube, we don't really have any of these edges, but we can still kind of demonstrate the functionality of this. So with those 3 edges assigned, if we render this now, it will draw on those 3 edges. So that's kind of cool. And material boundaries just draws on edges that go between two different materials. Say for instance that we wanted to use different colors or line styles on certain objects. We can use the group selection setting here. Let's turn that off. Group selection setting to assign different groups to different line sets. Let's go ahead and add another line set. Enable group under the selection by. Now there's an option for selecting which group. Let's go over to the plane, hit Control G, assign it to some group called blue lines. Now select the group in our line set and plop it in there. I'm also going to name this line set blue lines as well. So that's good. And if we just render this now, it will draw on that object. If we turn it off and render, it's just our cube. Turn it on, it's just our plane, or it's our plane and our cube. We can turn off the line set, the original line set, and it will just be the plane. So that's how you separate those out. I'm going to turn it back on. Okay, so now that we have just the blue lines rendering, or the blue line rendering to our plane, we can change the style under the Freestyle line styles. Head over to color, change the base color. I'm just going to turn it blue. Oops, there we go. And if we render this now, the line will be blue. So that was pretty sweet, and the line on the cube is still black. If we uncheck the original, just to show that the black line isn't overriding our blue line, we can just render that now, and there is no blue line. So the group option is working. Let's turn that back on. So let's head over to the strokes panel now, and we'll have a little bit more control over how the line itself behaves. We can split it up, or we can make it dashed. So far, I haven't really figured out the difference. It's still pretty fun though. I think what it has to do is how it draws it. I'm guessing that splitting, it's like lifting the pen and just drawing it piece by piece. I'm feeling like dashed line is where you draw the line and then erase a little bit. So it'll react a little bit differently to some different modifiers. So let's go ahead and use the dash line here. The first box is the length of the first drawn portion. Let's make it 4. And then the next one is the length of our first gap. Let's make it 2. And if we go ahead and render this now, we can see that we have a longer dash followed by a shorter gap. And we can do this up to 3 variations, so let's do that. Let's put in a dash of 1 and a gap of 2, and maybe a dash of 10 and a gap of 5. I don't know, just for fun. And render that now. And we've got our long 10 length here. Then we've got a shorter 1 length here. And then we've got a medium 4 length here. And you can definitely see where that gap of 5 is. So that is pretty fun. The caps seem to affect when we split the edge, and that's just the shape that will show up at the end of a line. So we have covered the strokes, the color, and now let's play with thickness. It's fairly intuitive. From here we can set the thickness of a line. So, I don't know, we can turn that up and it'll get thicker. Maybe go to 10, it'll be super thick. So that's pretty fun. There are a few modifiers that we can use to affect the thickness. So a long stroke allows us to modify really any of the line attributes. So, or the line attributes as our brush moves along our line here. Yes, you could make a rainbow colored line if you like. I think that the calligraphy modifier here is the only modifier that is specific to this particular setting. So, this guy here. And what it does is it allows you to set a brush angle, and it will maintain that orientation as, or maintain the orientation that you assign to it. This is a pretty neat little feature. It looks pretty good on writing or for circles. Really any curve will do, and it really doesn't do a whole lot for straight lines because it's just straight. And finally, there are some geometry settings. Let's turn this off. Geometry settings. And this is all done through modifiers. They each do different things. Some are pretty cool. Like you can get wavy lines with a sinus displacement. So it's kind of a sine wave going on there. And it's pretty fun. You can also extend the edges or the ends of the lines. So at the corners here, you can have it trail off. The only one that I really haven't figured out yet is the blueprint modifier. It's kind of fun, I guess, but it doesn't really seem to have any rhyme or reason. It just puts stuff in random places. But if this were a solid line, let's go ahead and get rid of our dash line here. And we can change where that radius goes. It's like someone's taken a pen and physically drawn it. And it would probably look a little bit better if we turn this thickness down to 3 or some reasonable value. Just like someone took a pen and physically drew on our drawing. So that's pretty fun. I'm not really sure how you control where the position of that is, but play around with that and figure out what it does. So this pretty well can conclude the introduction to Freestyle. You can probably figure out how to create your blueprints on your own now, but in the case that you still want help, let's begin on that. Open up a new scene in Blender. Let's begin by enabling the Extra Objects add-on. Open up the User Preferences, click on Add-ons, Add Mesh, and check Add Mesh Extra Objects. This will give us access to some neat objects, some things like gears and gemstones. We're going to use a gear for this example because it's a primitive object, but it is interesting enough for a blueprint. Let's set up our scene so that the blueprints look good. Go over to the World Settings, click Paper Sky and Blend Sky. This way we can get a nice gradient over the background. I'm going to have it fade from a kind of a dark grayish blue, so something right about there, maybe a little bit more blue, to a little bit lighter blue. So probably maybe a little bit less. Something kind of like that. Maybe a little bit more blue. Just adjust it until you get it to where you like it. So something kind of like that. We should also position the camera at the top. So go into top view mode, hit Control Alt 0. Now we'll just put our camera up in top view. And then set the lens to orthographic. Now we need to actually enable Freestyle. So come over to the render settings, check Freestyle, and in the render layers, add a new line set. Let's call this line set Graph. And then let's disable this selection by visibility and make sure that only edge mark is checked. So uncheck everything else. Since this layer is for our graph grid, we don't want it to stick out too much. So let's go ahead and change the color first to white, and then turn the alpha down to 0.25. Okay, so now let's go ahead and delete our cube and bring in a plane. Scale it up so that it's just larger than the actual camera view itself. Now hit W, and we're going to subdivide it 10 times. Let's do it again, just once, maybe twice. That should be good. I like that. Okay. So now let's go ahead and delete these extra faces because they're just going to add to our render time and we don't need them. Then we can just drag this guy up. Okay, there we go. So now that we have our plane, what we should do, since this is going to become a grid, we need to hit Control E and mark freestyle edges. And this will just make everything here a freestyle edge, so it will be drawn. Let's delete those faces there, vertices there. Okay, so that's looking good. Now, let's give this a quick render. And it doesn't look that great. First, let's go ahead and delete the lamp. Second, let's give this a new material. And this is going to be a transparent material. So come under Transparency, check it, click Mask, and set the alpha to 0. Now if we render this, it will create a nice grid over our blue background. Okay, so that's looking fine and all, but unfortunately we cannot see our grid. So over in the Objects panel, check Wire and Draw All Edges. And this will just force it to draw the wires, and now we can actually see our grid. So I'm just going to reposition the camera a little bit so that it looks a little bit better. And that is pretty good. So now we are going to create a little border around our drawing area. So bring in a new plane. Let's go into front view mode and make sure that it's above. I mean, you can have it intersect since they're both going to be transparent objects, but it's easier to tell what's going on if we don't do that. So let's just scale it up Just gonna bump it up there, maybe down a little bit. And you don't want this actually being directly over a line, because the border here will actually kind of blend in, and that's not so great. So we can just extrude a new plane in. It's the same as hitting I and creating an inlay. And I think that's good for the width, and I'm just going to scale it down along the Y. So, and remember, you're going to have to fit some text in here, like the title and your name. So make sure that there's enough room. Okay, and then when you're done with that, ooh, we got a problem there. There we go. That should be good. Once we're done with that, what we should do, let's just render it now. We'll see a black thing over the top, and that's no good. So let's go ahead and give it our transparent material. Render it now, and we don't see anything at all. So let's go ahead and create a new group. I'm going to call this border. Actually, we don't even have to do that. And then come over to our freestyle line set, create a new line set, and I'm going to call this one border. And visibility can be on or off, doesn't really matter. Uncheck silhouette and uncheck the crease. If we render that now, we'll kind of see this black line along here. Not completely optimal, but if we switch it and we change the color to white, it'll suddenly pop out a little bit more. And we can turn up the thickness to maybe 4 or something, and it'll show up even more. So that's an easy way of making our border here really pop out. Now it's time to actually bring in the original, or the gear itself. So hit Shift A, come down to Extra Objects, and bring in the gear. I'm using a gear because it's complicated enough that it will give us an interesting result, but it also has a primitive built in, so we don't actually have to do that much work. And when you first import it, it seems to have a bit of a bug here where the teeth of the gear switch. And the easiest way to fix this is just clicking and changing a parameter, and it will start to work just fine. So we can go with 12 teeth or 10 teeth. It doesn't really matter. Let's just do 12 for now. So once we are happy with our gear, we can go ahead and bring it into a group. Let's call this flat gear or gear flat, up to you. If we render this, it's this big ugly black gear that's right in the middle of everything. That's no good. So let's go ahead and fix that. Easiest way to fix it, well, I'm just going to drag it over there. Give it a transparent material, just like everything else. And let's actually rotate this just a little bit so that the top of the gear is along the line. And if we just scale it down slightly, it'll fit a little bit better. There we go. Try to line it up with the grid, and it will look a little bit more professional. So render it now. We see a white circle. That's not quite what we want, so we should probably fix that. Hop over to the render layers. Throw in a new render layer, or a new render freestyle line set, and I'm just going to call this flat gear. And we can just close this, although we may want to set the color to white and probably turn up the thickness. Probably about 5 would be good. Make it really stand out from the rest of the lines. And okay, so let's make this look better. First thing I want to do is hide everything else. So hitting Control I and then H, we can hide everything. And then just take these 2 circles here, and I'm going to extrude them in and create a nice little edge in here. So just extrude that, hit S, Shift, Z, and this will scale it along every axis except for the Z axis. And we can just scale it in like so. I might unhide our first plane so that I can see how large or small it is. So once it's all lined up with stuff, I'm happy. So let's extrude that again, hit S, and scale it down. I'm just going to scale it down to the same size as our grid again. And I might just scale it down a little bit more along the Z. And then once we're done with that, hit, I think it's bridge edge, yeah, and it will just fill in the rest of the faces for you. So that's really an easy way of doing things. Now let's go ahead and select these two, but not the internal edges here. So what I did was I hit Control-Alt-Shift and then right-clicked on this and it deselected everything. Now if we hit Control-E, mark Freestyle Edge, and then come down here to our flat gear settings and check Edge Marks, we can give that a quick render, and guess what? We see it, and it looks pretty good. Unfortunately, it changed the lines on our grid. So let's just turn on Group and set it to flat gear. Now our grid is no longer so bold, and the gear is standing out perfectly. We're going to go ahead and create another view of our gear. So what we're going to do is we're going to take it, duplicate it, let's drag it over here, and then take it and rotate it along the Y by 90 degrees. Quick render, it doesn't look that great, so let's go ahead and fix it. So make sure to clear those freestyle edges for now, and let's see, bring it over here. I don't really care where. I'm actually just going to scale it down along the X so that it fits right inside of, or maybe we can scale it up. Doesn't really matter. Just get it to how you like it. I'm going to do two units, and that'll be pretty fun. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a nice outline in solid white, and then these inner circle pieces here will be in a dashed line to show that they're actually inside of our object here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to get rid of this flat gear. Let's add it to a new group, and I'm just going to call this upright gear. Okay. And now let's bring in a new line set. I'm going to call it upright gear solid. And let's just give it a group, upright gear. That is fantastic. Quick render, it doesn't really show up. It sort of does, but not how we want it. Let's turn this up, set the thickness to 5 as well, and we'll see a little bit more. That actually isn't too bad. Unfortunately, not quite how we want it, so let's go ahead and fix it. What we're going to do, leave visibility checked, visible, those are all good. What we can do is we're going to use the edge mask, and we're just going to, oops, get rid of these. We only need the outer rim here, so just deselect everything except for that outer rim. Okay, and then don't forget that there are edges up here. So let's deselect those, and then we'll just get a nice ring of edges along the edge. So hit Control-E, mark Freestyle Edge. Let's take this top guy here, or this one, and this bottom one here. Hit Control-E, mark the edges, and we'll want to show the height of these teeth, so mark that edge there, and mark this edge here. Quick render. Can't really see a whole lot. So we should also check the edge marks. Now, because it's invisible, and our graph doesn't have a group assigned, it thinks that this line here is actually part of the graph, because it has no information, and unfortunately we have another tooth blocking it. So, easiest way to deal with this tooth is actually to just delete it. So just get rid of it. There we go. Although not the edges, just the inner faces. Like so. Okay, quick render. And we can see what's going on, sort of. What is that? Interesting. Yeah. So that's going pretty well. Let's go ahead now and add in a new line set. We're going to call it a bright gear dashed. And this is just going to be for these inner pieces right there. I'm just going to hit Control E, mark Freestyle Edge. Then we're going to go into Side View, tab into Edit Mode here, select these two guys here, mark those Freestyle edges, and that'll be good. Okay. Now, this is why we have the border on a group. So, just do that. Because the border was, I believe it was interfering up here, and it was giving us some bad results. So, put the border into its group. Now we can actually work on our dashed line. First, let's go ahead and fix the color and set the thickness up to 5. If we do that, well, we'll get a bunch of strange results again. Set the visibility to hidden. Another render. And you'll start to see that it's the hidden edges. And now if we go to edge marked, well, it will show us a bit too much because it's not part of the gear group. So let's do that. There we go. So now we can see this wonderful little gear thing going on here. Let's actually get these edges here as well. Select that and that. Hit Control E, mark Freestyle Edge, and then we'll see this nice little thing coming off of here. And that is all because of this. So now it's very easy to come into the strokes, turn on split line, and I'm just going to do maybe 5, 2, and then that should be good. Quick render, nice little dash line in here. We can change this, probably turn that up a little bit for a few more dashes. There we go. Any setting is probably fine, really. Doesn't seem to be showing up that well though. I'm not sure what that's all about. Technically, since this gear is symmetric, we can just delete this whole half here. So, delete those vertices. Man, does not want to delete them. Okay. I think what was happening was that it was getting a circle here, and the dashes were just overlaying each other. Now it's time to add some labels to our blueprint. Unfortunately, for things like our arrows, which will probably just be an edge, Freestyle doesn't draw on edges. It just draws on meshes, or full face meshes. As far as I know anyway. I haven't seen it actually work all that well. Let's turn on that. I'll clean those dashes up a little bit better. But yeah, so Freestyle doesn't as far as I know, draw on the edges, so we're going to have to use a separate material. So let's actually create those edges first, or let's hide that. There we go. Let's create the arrows. So center that cursor there. Let's bring in a new plane. I'm going to bring it up along the Z so that we can see what's going on. Tab into edit mode, delete 2 vertices, and then let's bring this, so hit GX1, so to bring it into the center, and then I'm just going to take this bottom vertice, GY1. That will just line it up right there. Okay, so now really what we can do is just hit E, and then holding down Control, it will snap it to the Blender grid. So that just makes it easier to create an even arrow. So that looks fairly decent. And we can just bring it up. Like so. Hit Shift D to duplicate it. Actually, better one. Alt D will duplicate the object, but not the mesh, and that will actually save us a lot of space. So, well, not in this case, but in the case where you have a lot of vertices, it will save you a lot of hard drive space. So let's just rotate this 180 degrees to get it facing both directions. It'll be nice and even with the top of our gear. And now if we just duplicate this, because I'm lazy, rotate it along the Z 90 degrees, bring it up along the Y, like so. I'm just going to delete these, bring this guy out, and right over there. Duplicate it, let's bring it down, right to there, and that's good. We can go ahead and give it a new material. Let's call it arrows, doesn't really matter. And first thing you're going to do is set this to wire. Second, turn it to shadeless. Render it, and we can kind of see it sticking out. It looks okay. If we were to turn on the emit, it would be brighter, but you'll notice that it has this funny edge here. I'm not really sure what that's all about. Maybe, yeah, I haven't been able to figure out how to fix that. Maybe turn off traceable. Didn't really help. So I'm just going to use shadeless, and we can actually just turn this all the way up to bright white, and it'll help a little bit. So that is the best way of getting lines in. And then we can just take these. Oops. Having a hard time selecting here. Not that. There we go. Hit Control L and make links to the objects, or to the materials. We want to do that there as well. And we can just render that, and we'll get a nice little edge there. Unfortunately, we can't really see that too well, so we can just extrude this up a little bit. We'll get a little bit of a depth going on there. Just to brighten up that line. And then, I mean, we can do that again over here to these objects, or to these dimensions. And then for the text, let's just bring in a text object. I'm gonna put that maybe over down here for the author and whatnot, and the date. So let's take this size, turn it down, I don't know, just so that it fits inside of our border. And then we can just type author BlenderWiz. Maybe it'll be too big. So there we go. And the date, of course. And if you leave it in left alignment, it's easier to align everything along the left. Of course. That makes sense. Oops. We want the size. Where'd that go? There it is. We just want it to fit. And then I'm just going to do date, and today is June the 2nd, 2013. Okay, let's go ahead and give this a nice little material. It's pretty much the same as the arrows, except instead of being wire, it's a surface. So, well, that didn't really show up. It's supposed to show up. Materials. Maybe if we try bringing that up. There we go. And it's gotta fit. Come on. Just try to get everything to fit nicely inside of the border here. If it really comes down to it, you can just take the border and expand it. So, just like that. That is if the letters don't want to behave. And then you can add a title, some markings here, and you'll have a fairly decent looking blueprint. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial. If you want to see more in the future, please subscribe to BlenderWiz if you haven't already. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please like it and feel free to watch more. If you have recommendations or suggestions for future tutorials, feel free to leave some feedback in the comments section below. Thank you for watching.